The alien princess melted in rain, so he covered the sky for her. They found her trembling beneath the scorched ruins, her skin steaming from the rain she barely escaped. The alien princess, made of delicate matter and starlight, couldn't survive Earth's most gentle element. Yet one human refused to let the clouds take her. He didn't just offer shelter, he swore to change the sky. The rain began as a whisper over the plains of what was once a research colony, and now served as a relocation camp for interstellar refugees. Just mist clinging to cracked solar panels and flattened prefab tents. But for Elias, stationed on the perimeter that day, that soft drizzle turned into the most terrifying sound he'd ever heard because it meant the alien princess, the last survivor of her royal bloodline from a species not just beautiful but dangerously delicate, was out, there somewhere without cover, exposed to Earth's toxic sky. And even before the alarm klaxons began to cry out about a sudden atmospheric shift, even before the sky turned the color of split metal and soldiers scrambled to move civilians, Elias was already sprinting across the clay-soaked field, eyes locked on the thin blue beacon still flickering through the mist from the site where her life pod had crashed because he'd seen the scan readings himself, seen the molecular incompatibility between her skin and Earth's water, understood in chilling detail how each droplet of rain on her body could shred her molecular structure, like acid, and all he could picture was the image burned into his mind from her initial rescue 2 weeks ago. Her lying unconscious, skin like glass veined with faint light, body trembling as medics waved off steam rising from her arms where Earth's air had merely brushed her. And this time she hadn't returned to her dome after her morning walk with Elias, hadn't answered his calls through the translator device he'd custom-rigged for her, hadn't been seen on the cameras at all since sunrise, and now the rain was falling hard and sharp. The kind that pelted your skin like shot and flooded camp gutters in seconds. And Elias didn't stop to explain or ask permission, just shoved past the startled guards as they yelled after him and kept running into the growing storm until he reached the crash ridge, where the soil was already a muddy sinkhole and pieces of shattered foliage floated in rivulets. And there, half buried, beneath the bent struts of her old pod, curled in on herself with a sheen of liquid vapor rising from her melting shoulders, lay the alien princess, her long silvery hair clinging to her body like melted starlight, her skin pale and blistering with every drop, mouth open in a silent scream that didn't carry through the thunder, and Elias dropped to his knees, hands fumbling as he tore off his jacket and wrapped it over her with the frantic care of someone handling fire, his heart slamming against his ribs because she was slipping, parts of her arm already semi-translucent, her breath shallow and uneven as if every second she spent in the open air was carving pieces off her soul and lifting her in his arms, her body terrifyingly light, like holding smoke bound in fragile flesh. He turned and ran, shielding her, with his own back as the storm intensified, shielding her with curses and prayers and memories of his little sister gasping for air in a monsoon back home, because he knew what it meant to watch someone drown in the open sky, and he would not let this happen again, not to her, not after everything she'd trusted him with in these last weeks, the way she'd touched his hand for the first time when he explained constellations to her, the way she'd mimicked a laugh the first time he tripped over his boots in the soft gravel of the garden dome, the way she'd hummed wordlessly at night when she thought no one was listening, and he remembered how she'd stood beneath the transparent canopy at sunset yesterday, gazing longingly up at the clouds like someone staring at a memory they were not allowed to touch. And now those same clouds were killing her. And Elias didn't know how far he could run before she vanished in his arms. But he didn't stop until he reached his private garage unit on the west edge of the camp, a place forbidden to refugees and unauthorized for conversion, but where he'd secretly been constructing a storm-proof enclosure out of scavenged materials for her, an idea born out of instinct, not regulation. And he slammed the keypad with shaking fingers, and the door hissed open just as the wind howled. Louder, and he laid her gently onto the soft surface of a workbench he'd padded with heat-resistant blankets, pulling heat lamps close and sealing the hatch behind them before kneeling beside her, whispering her name, at least the closest approximation of it his throat could form, and watching as her eyelids fluttered, as her luminous violet eyes opened half-lidded with pain and confusion, as her lips, thin and trembling, parted to emit a soft musical whimper that sliced through his chest like a blade, and he reached out, brushing the soaked strands of hair from her face, and said, "You're safe now. I've got you. I won't let the rain touch you again." And she blinked, slow and glassy, then reached for him with one melting hand, and Elias nearly broke then and there, because the trust in her expression was not just childlike, it was ancient, royal, divine, like a creature born of stars now reduced to this terrible fragility. And over the next 3 hours, as the storm raged outside, he worked feverishly to stabilize her, using UV neutralizers and low-frequency light diffusers, even recycling warm air through a handmade scrubber unit to simulate her original pod's environment. And slowly she began to breathe easier, her skin knitting itself back together in radiant threads, and she never looked away from him. Not once, not even as her strength returned and her posture straightened and she sat up, draped in a silken emergency wrap. Eyes filled not just with gratitude but something far deeper, an ache that resonated between them without language. And in that moment Elias knew this wasn't just about survival anymore, wasn't about duty or cross-species diplomacy. This was about building her a world where she could exist without fear. And the next morning, long before the repair crews had even dried out the flooded labs, he began assembling the first of what would become his most impossible invention, a mobile, weather-shielded biosphere unit built from mining drones, mirrored shielding, and atmospheric filters, not just to protect her but to follow her wherever she walked, a portable sky of her own. And when he showed it to her days later, the way her eyes lit up, not in the flash of awe but in the slow, soft swell of relief, made him vow something. He never said aloud but knew in his bones. He would not just build her shelter, he would build her a sky she could trust, a sky she could live beneath, a sky where the rain could fall and never touch her again. The storm had passed, but its echoes clung to the alien princess like damp silk, invisible yet suffocating. Her violet eyes, more vivid than any human hue, scanned the horizon with a mixture of awe and dread, even as the last wisps of clouds slithered away under the morning sun's golden touch. Beside her, Mason remained steady, his hand hovering near her shoulder, not quite touching. He remembered too well how even the gentlest of rain had burned through her skin like acid. The shelter he'd rushed her into, an abandoned solar farming dome on the outskirts of a forgotten Earth settlement, had done enough to spare her life, but not without consequence. Parts of her arms still shimmered with translucent scars, etched into her skin like a warning from her homeworld. Nature's decree that she did not belong here. And yet, she stayed. For reasons neither of them fully dared to speak aloud, the alien princess remained, each day a gamble, each moment under the atmosphere a choice to endure what her body should never have survived. Mason had spent the last 72 hours retrofitting the dome with atmospheric regulators, dragging out every salvaged microclimate unit he could find, praying the filters could reduce Earth's humidity to something tolerable for her. He hadn't slept, hadn't eaten properly, but every glance at her, curled up in the corner of the dome or tracing the patterns of a dry leaf like it was the most precious artifact in the galaxy, fueled his obsession. She was more than delicate. She was impossible, a being sculpted of starlight and fragility, and still she had chosen him. "I need to build more than a dome," he muttered, watching the atmospheric readings on the HUD fluctuate with maddening inconsistency. "I need to build a sky." It sounded absurd even as he said it, but the memory of her screaming, crumpling in his arms as the drizzle touched her skin, haunted him more than any impossibility. The alien princess watched him with a quiet intensity, her voice seldom used but always exact when she spoke. "You defy your nature to protect mine. Why?" Mason didn't know how to answer that. The truth was simple yet too large for words. Because no one else would, and because she mattered in a way nothing else ever had. Because in the short time they had known each other, trapped together when her shuttle crashed near his research outpost, she had taught him what silence could mean, what beauty looked like unspoken, and how much power resided in kindness shared across species. "Because you deserve to breathe," he said at last. She blinked, and then tilted her head toward the brittle dome above them. "But I cannot beneath this sky." That night, while she rested inside her customized habitat chamber, a sealed, humidity-controlled pod Mason had jerry-rigged from what once was an agricultural test unit, he stayed up scanning meteorological databases, cross-referencing atmospheric particle dispersal with geoengineering archives. If he could not change her biology, then he would alter the environment around her. He began sketching designs for a canopy network, massive retractable shade sails rigged with atmospheric diffusers that could intercept cloud moisture and release dry, safe air beneath. The idea was madness. It would take weeks, maybe months. He didn't have government funding, he didn't have clearance, but what he did have was a crash-landed alien princess and a planet that seemed to poison her with every breeze. The following morning, he showed her the schematic. She stared at it, then at him, and for the first time a smile curved across her lips, hesitant, but real. "You will move the heavens," she said softly. "I will cover them," he replied. With the help of scavenged robotics from an old terraforming station, Mason began building the first of the diffusers. The alien princess offered insights when she could, drawing on fragments of memory from her own species' climate-controlled structures. She had never lived on a planet with open skies. Her people, it turned out, had evolved in caverns laced with breathable vapors generated by bioluminescent fungal mats and crystal matrices, not unlike Earth's most alien ecosystems. Her very DNA rejected ultraviolet light, found the chemical trace of ozone unbearable. Rain, made of Earth's microbial-rich water cycle, was akin to acid for her kind. And yet she stayed. More than once she passed out when a seam in the dome failed or a storm swept through unexpectedly. More than once he caught her weeping without tears. Her people didn't cry the way humans did, but her anguish was unmistakable, her small form trembling as if the weight of Earth's gravity was slowly crushing her spirit. Mason refused to let her break. He reinforced the dome with layers of carbon glass sheeting and ultraviolet reflectors. He activated ion scrubbers. He mapped the weather patterns by hand. As the weeks passed, word spread, rogue broadcasts, whispers, from border colonies, tales of the human who was shielding a sky for a stranger. Curious travelers arrived at the edge of the settlement, offering solar arrays, atmospheric gel packs, obsolete biotech once used for deep space colonization, all to help this absurd, beautiful mission. Not out of charity, out of reverence. Because somewhere in this act of quiet defiance, Mason had inspired something that had long been missing. Hope. The alien princess, too, transformed. She no longer flinched at the creak of a hatch opening. Her voice grew stronger. One evening, under the safety of the canopy's test panel, she sang for the first time. Notes so ethereal they made the circuits in his sensors flutter. "In my world," she said, "songs were our shields. We sang to survive the silence." He said nothing, merely sat beside her, shoulder to shoulder, letting her presence seep into his like warmth into frozen bones. The final component was the sky engine, a network of high-powered dispersers designed to break cloud formation and reroute weather flow. It was illegal, dangerous, and very likely to draw attention from Earth's atmospheric regulators. Mason built it anyway. When it was ready, she insisted on standing beside him at the launch console. "If it fails," she said, "I want to face the sky unafraid." He took her hand, not because she was weak, but because she was everything he was trying to protect. As the engine roared to life, the clouds above shuddered, split, and cleared. For the first time in weeks, sunlight returned, but filtered, refracted through the canopy's quantum mesh, rendered harmless. A hush fell over the settlement. Then she stepped out, unshielded, uncovered, and she did not melt. The alien princess stood in the light Mason had changed for her, and for the first time the world did not reject her presence. Around them, humans and aliens alike watched as the impossible became real. Mason, exhausted, dirt-smeared, barely standing, looked up at the sky he had just altered, and at the girl whose smile now held an entire galaxy's worth of gratitude. He didn't need to ask whether it had been worth it. He already knew. Because Some beings weren't meant to flee from the world. Some were meant to inspire it to change. The filtered sunlight bathed the alien princess in a muted golden warmth, harmless now, tamed by the mesh canopy Mason had labored over for weeks. Where once she had flinched at even the shadow of a cloud, now she stood beneath Earth's sky, no longer its victim but its quiet conqueror. Yet as peace settled like a delicate mist across the landscape, neither of them was fooled into thinking the danger was truly over. Mason knew better, and so did she. The Sky Engine's activation had triggered more than a shift in weather. It had sent ripples through the orbital surveillance network, alerting Earth's Environmental Regulation Authority, and, perhaps more concerning, the Interplanetary Species Commission. Unauthorized geoengineering was a felony. Harboring a non-registered alien was treason. Mason's name, until now a forgotten footnote in planetary databases, was suddenly at the center of a quiet storm. They had maybe days, maybe less. But the alien princess, no longer shrinking behind the walls of the dome, met the future with a quiet, terrifying clarity. "Let them come," she said one morning, watching Mason work on extending the canopy's range. "I will not hide anymore." Her voice held weight now, not just because of the harmonic resonance unique to her species, but because she'd begun to believe in her own right to exist. Earth had tried to reject her, but Mason had taught her resistance. Her posture, once curved like someone bracing for pain, was now tall, regal, unyielding. Mason, for all his exhaustion, found strength in her defiance. And he needed it, because the warning signs arrived quickly. A low-orbit drone pausing too long overhead, the chatter of distant satellites pinging local frequencies, the sudden disruption of supply drones that had once passed through unchallenged. Mason didn't tell her everything, but she sensed it. Her kind had always been attuned to tension, to the vibrations of energy shifting between beings. "You're afraid for me," she said. "No," he replied. "I'm afraid of losing what we've built." He meant the dome, the canopy, the fragile safety net stretched across this patch of Earth. But she looked at him differently now, and he realized his words had meant more than he intended. She reached for his hand, her fingers cool and strange against his skin. "You've changed the sky for me. I would burn the stars for you." Mason had no answer to that. The next morning, the first authority vessel arrived. Low profile, black-bodied, silent. It didn't land, but hovered, watching. A day later, another came, and this one deployed reconnaissance bots. Mason scrambled to set up jamming fields, but they were outmatched. Surveillance bots moved like insects, slipping through his shielding to scan the structures, capturing her image, marking her presence. There was no use denying it anymore. The world knew she existed. But the alien princess didn't retreat. Instead, she asked to speak. "They must see I'm not a weapon. I am not an experiment. I am someone." Mason hesitated but agreed. They set up a signal, a broadcast to nearby stations, using old Alliance protocols, an olive branch. Her message was short, simple. She stood in the filtered light, her scars faint but visible, and said, "I have no weapons, only breath. I am not here to conquer your planet. I only wish to exist beneath your sky." The transmission was sent, and for 2 days, silence answered. But then, a reply. Not from Earth, but from orbit. A delegation ship, official, armed. They announced their intention to land and review the environmental interference and detain the non-registered extraterrestrial. Mason's blood turned to ice. The alien princess did not flinch. "Then I will speak for myself," she said. And she did. When the officials arrived, 4 humans, 2 androids, and a representative from the Interplanetary Species Commission, she met them not as a fugitive, but as a sovereign. She greeted them in her native tongue, a song-like pulse that made even the androids hesitate, and then in broken but poignant English. "I did not choose to crash here, but I chose to stay. This human chose to save me, and this place where I once melted is now the only home I've ever known." The lead official, a woman with silver-stitched gloves and a face sculpted for politics, asked a single question. Why did you not report your survival to your own kind? The alien princess blinked slowly. Because they never would have come for me. Her voice trembled, but she stood her ground. To them, I was an error, a princess born of the wrong genetic blend. Too sensitive to sunlight, too frail. They sent me to Earth to prove I could adapt or die. A hush fell across the delegation. Even Mason was stunned. She had never told him this. So you weren't just a crash survivor, he whispered later. You were exiled. She nodded. Not every crown is a gift. The lead official listened in silence, and then turned to Mason. You altered weather systems, violated environmental protocols, and harbored an undocumented sentient. I did, Mason said, and I'd do it again. She opened her mouth to respond, but before she could, something unexpected happened. The people came. Not soldiers, not regulators. People. From the surrounding settlements, from neighboring research zones, even from orbital colonies. They came with voice recorders, banners, makeshift signs. Let her breathe, one of them read. The sky is big enough for all of us. Another simply said, love is not illegal. Mason stood frozen as the crowd grew. Hundreds, then thousands. The delegation faltered. Public optics were now in play. And in the court of public opinion, the alien princess had become more than an anomaly. She was a symbol of vulnerability, of resilience, of shared existence. If you take her, one settler said through a portable loudspeaker, you better be ready to take all of us too. Faced with global scrutiny, the delegation backed down temporarily. They said they would review the matter, but everyone knew what that meant. There would be politics, reports, debates. Time. Time that Mason would use to expand the canopy network, to formalize the settlement into a climate-controlled refuge. Time the alien princess would use to become more than a myth. And so she did. She began teaching the local children how to communicate in her song language. She began cultivating plants from her homeworld, integrating them with Earth's soil. She even joined Mason in his work, no longer a figure to protect but a partner in creation. Together, they redesigned the canopy to respond dynamically to shifts in light. Together, they installed mist filtration units to recycle breathable air into structures beyond the dome. Together, they walked into a world that once rejected her and made it not just tolerable but livable. And when the first rain came after the storm, the one Mason had always dreaded, it fell quietly, repelled by the mesh canopy, guided by artificial winds toward dry zones. The alien princess stood beneath the clouds, no longer afraid, and Mason stood beside her, no longer alone. The Earth had not changed for her, but one human had, and in doing so he had made the planet a place where she could stand and smile beneath the sky. They were not free yet, but they were together. And sometimes, that was enough to shift the heavens themselves. The air had grown still in recent days, not with the ominous weight of a storm, but the fragile quiet of a future teetering on the edge of possibility. And as Mason stood atop the final canopy tower, a marvel of human ingenuity now linked with alien design, he knew the world had already changed, even if the rest of Earth had yet to catch up. Below him, nestled inside the adaptive meshwork of filtered skies and bio-shielded structures, the alien princess walked among a growing community of settlers, scientists, and civilians who had chosen to remain in what was now unofficially called Haven Light, the first human-alien cohabitation zone protected not by policy, but by defiance and devotion. The once exiled princess, whose touch had once sparked decay under the bare sun, and whose very survival had been seen as an error of nature by her people, now stood at the heart of Earth's most unlikely miracle. Not because she had found refuge, but because she had created it, piece by piece, alongside the only human who had ever looked at her and seen life rather than liability. But the reprieve was never meant to last unchallenged. From orbit, the Interplanetary Council had begun formal reviews, not only of the alien princess's status, but of Mason's unauthorized climate engineering, and as tensions mounted in diplomatic Channels and headlines began to stir with words like asylum, genetic liability, and species protocol violations. Havenlight prepared, not for war, but for truth. And the truth was this: she had survived the unspeakable, not because her biology had changed, but because someone had cared enough to change the world around her. Her people had sent her to Earth as an experiment, a cruel test wrapped in diplomatic indifference. But what they had not anticipated was the power of Earth's greatest weapon, compassion unchained by policy. It was time they saw the result of their cruelty. And so, with Mason at her side, the alien princess requested audience not just with Earth's authorities, but with a delegation from her homeworld, who had at last acknowledged her survival only after pressure from planetary watchdogs and viral public support. They landed in silence, gleaming crafts with silent tread and empty expressions, and when their envoys emerged, dressed in flowing armor that repelled even the filtered light, they regarded the dome not as a sanctuary, but as a statistical anomaly. "You were deemed unviable," one of them said, voice pulsing through translation nodes. "Your return would destabilize our succession order." "Then it is good I do not intend to return," the alien princess replied, her voice steady, echoing through Havenlight's amplified speaker system so all could hear. "Earth did not ask for me, but it made space for me. That is more than you ever did." Her people offered options: containment, rehabilitation, quiet relocation, but not dignity, not recognition, and certainly not the right to remain. But Earth's people, its misfits, rebels, scientists, and laborers, had gathered quietly and persistently to say otherwise. Mason watched the tension unfold with dread. He kept buried deep. He knew this wasn't just about her status, it was about precedent, about whether compassion could legally triumph over genetics, whether a sentient being could claim a right to exist without fitting neatly into boxes made for easier governance. And then something remarkable happened. From within Havenlight, one of the children, a girl barely 6 years old who had learned to speak the alien princess's harmonic language, stepped forward with a voice recorder and played back a phrase the princess had taught her. The translation blinked across the air. "She is part of our sky now." That moment shattered something ancient and cold in the delegation's posture, and whether it was diplomacy or genuine shift did not matter. For the first time, the aliens from her homeworld addressed her not as an outcast but as an individual with sovereignty. "You are no longer one of us," they said, "but you are not nothing. You are other." It was not recognition, but it was a beginning. They withdrew without violence, and Havenlight remained untouched. In the weeks that followed, Mason and the alien princess worked to formalize what had once been a sanctuary of desperation into a beacon of coexistence. They published papers, gave secure broadcasts, developed renewable systems that could be replicated elsewhere for other beings who struggled to live beneath alien suns. And though the rain still came, and still remained lethal to her touch, they had systems now, protocols, even joy. Mason caught her laughing once during a filtered moonstorm, the droplets hitting the dome in symphonic rhythm as she danced in the safety of synthetic twilight, her hair glowing like woven starlight, her presence more radiant than any sun. And it was in that moment that Mason realized something he had never dared articulate. This wasn't a rescue story. It wasn't a romance. It wasn't even about survival. It was about reclamation. About taking the broken shards of identity and fate and reassembling them into something the universe had no blueprint for. They were a new template, a new myth. A human who had covered the sky for someone not because she asked, but because she deserved to see the stars without burning. And an alien princess who had melted in the rain, not because she was weak, but because her strength had never been measured in resistance, only in endurance. The world had not ended. Earth had not been destroyed. No galactic war had erupted, but something just as profound had occurred. A quiet revolution of empathy, one that could not be undone. And as Havenlight expanded, drawing in others like her, those misfit souls exiled by genetics, policy, or fear, the alien princess stood not as their ruler, but as their first. the flame keeper who had survived the downpour and taught the sky itself to bend. And Mason? He never returned to the world that had once dismissed him as irrelevant. He had already found the only purpose that mattered. In the quiet hours when Earth's filtered dusk fell across Haven Light and the dome caught the color of distant nebulae, he and the alien princess would sit side by side, her hand in his, and watch a sky they had redefined together. A sky no longer fatal. A sky no longer unkind. A sky that remembered what it had once tried to erase. And in the language only they truly shared, of presence, of patience, of love forged in lightless hours, they told the stars that they had won, not through force but through the one thing the universe had underestimated, the will to protect beauty, even when the whole world said it didn't belong.